There is a person in almost every room you have ever been in: a meeting, a classroom, a dinner table, a social gathering, who said almost nothing, who offered no opinion when opinions were flying around the room with the confidence of people who had clearly not considered the complexity of what they were opining about, who sat in a stillness that some people read as disinterest and others read as arrogance, and almost nobody read correctly, which is as the behavioral signature of a mind that was processing the situation at a depth that the noise of the room made it impossible to express. And there is a reasonable chance that that person was the most intelligent person present, not despite their silence, but in some profound and psychologically precise way because of it. And today we are going to go completely inside the psychology of why genuinely intelligent people choose silence in situations where less intelligent people choose noise, because the research on this is both surprising and immediately recognizable once you see it, and understanding it changes not just how you see quiet people, but how you understand the relationship between intelligence, language, and the specific courage it takes to say nothing in a world that has decided that the person talking the most is the person thinking the most, which is one of the most expensive and most pervasive cognitive errors in all of social psychology. Let's begin with the most foundational psychological explanation for intelligent silence. And it is grounded in a concept that cognitive psychologists call the signal to noise ratio of communication, which is the proportion of genuinely meaningful, information-rich content in any verbal exchange relative to the total volume of words produced. Most human conversation, measured against this standard, operates at an extraordinarily low signal-to-noise ratio. The majority of what is said in most social and professional contexts is not genuinely informative, not analytically rigorous, not adding new understanding to the situation being discussed, but is instead performing social functions, signaling group membership, establishing status, managing interpersonal dynamics, filling silence that feels uncomfortable, demonstrating enthusiasm or loyalty or engagement through the mere act of verbal participation rather than through the quality of what is being said. The intelligent person's brain is acutely sensitive to this ratio. It processes incoming communication with a level of analytical precision that makes the gap between the content being expressed and the confidence with which it is being expressed both visible and genuinely uncomfortable. And the decision to stay silent is frequently the decision of a mind that has concluded, after rapid and largely unconscious evaluation, that there is nothing it can contribute to the current exchange that would meaningfully increase its signal-to-noise ratio, and that adding more noise to an already noisy system is a cost without a corresponding benefit. This is not contempt for the people speaking. It is a cognitive orientation toward communication that values accuracy over volume, precision over frequency, and genuine contribution over the social performance of participation. And it produces silence not as a withdrawal from the situation, but as the most honest response the intelligent mind has to a situation that has not yet presented a question worthy of the answer it could give. Now, let's look at the research on intelligence and verbal restraint, because the empirical literature on this connection is more extensive and more consistent than most people realize, and it challenges some of the most deeply held cultural assumptions about the relationship between intelligence and expressiveness. Studies on what researchers call epistemic humility, the accurate calibration of one's own knowledge, the capacity to know not just what you know, but the precise boundaries of what you don't know, consistently find that this calibration is positively correlated with measured intelligence and negatively correlated with the tendency toward confident, voluminous verbal expression. The Dunning-Kruger Effect, one of the most replicated findings in cognitive psychology, demonstrates that people with the least knowledge in a domain are consistently the most confident in their verbal expression about it, while people with the most knowledge are consistently most aware of the complexity, the uncertainty, and the limitations of their understanding. And this awareness translates directly and predictably into verbal restraint, into the qualification of claims, into the acknowledgement of alternative perspectives, and sometimes into the silence that is the honest response to a question whose full answer is more complex than the social situation has patience for. The intelligent person who stays silent in a debate about a complex topic is frequently doing so because they can see, with painful clarity, that the honest answer to the question being discussed is not the confident, unambiguous, easily expressible assertion that the social dynamic is demanding, but a nuanced, multi-conditional, uncertainty-acknowledging response that the room does not have the patience or the contextual knowledge to receive. And the choice between giving an honest, complex answer that will be misunderstood and giving no answer at all is a choice that intelligent people make consistently in favor of silence. Let's now examine the psychological experience of what researchers call intellectual loneliness, because this is the emotional reality that underlies much of intelligent silence, and naming it accurately is important for anyone who has experienced it and wondered what was wrong with them. Intellectual loneliness is the specific, acute experience of being surrounded by people with whom genuine intellectual connection is unavailable, not because those people are bad or unlikable, but because the conversations that would feel genuinely engaging, genuinely stimulating, genuinely alive to the intelligent person are not the conversations that the social situation is producing. And the gap between the conversation happening and the conversation that would feel real creates a specific kind of social isolation that is different from ordinary loneliness and far more difficult to explain. The intelligent person who is intellectually lonely in a social situation will frequently default to silence, not because they have nothing to say, but because what they have to say has no natural landing place in the current conversational context. They can see where the conversation could go, what depths it could reach, what genuinely interesting questions are hiding underneath the surface of what is being discussed. But to redirect the conversation toward those depths would require a social disruption that feels disproportionate, presumptuous, or simply exhausting to attempt. And so they stay silent, and they are perceived as aloof, or bored, or arrogant by the people around them who are enjoying a conversation that the intelligent person is experiencing as a kind of social hunger, present at the table, but not nourished by what is being served. Now, let's talk about the psychology of speaking and its relationship to thinking, because one of the most consistent and most important cognitive differences between people with high measured intelligence and those with average measured intelligence is the relationship between their internal cognitive processing and their verbal output. And this difference produces silence in a very specific and very understandable way. Research on metacognition, the capacity to think about one's own thinking, to monitor the quality and accuracy of one's own cognitive processes as they occur, consistently finds that people with higher cognitive ability engage in more extensive internal processing before committing to verbal expression, that they subject their own emerging conclusions to more rigorous internal scrutiny, that they are more likely to identify the flaws and gaps in their own reasoning before it becomes speech, and that this more extensive internal quality control process takes time that the social rhythm of most conversations does not naturally provide. The intelligent person who appears to be saying nothing is frequently doing an enormous amount of cognitive work, evaluating the question from multiple angles, considering the strongest objections to the most obvious answer, checking their reasoning for confirmation bias and motivated reasoning, identifying what they actually know versus what they are merely inferring, and arriving at a conclusion that is genuinely defensible rather than merely comfortable. And by the time this internal process is complete, the conversation has frequently moved on, which means the silence was not an absence of thought, but the consequence of an excess of it. This is in stark contrast to the cognitive style of low to moderate intelligence, which is characterized by faster commitment to initial impressions, less extensive internal scrutiny of emerging conclusions, and a greater readiness to externalize cognitive processing through speech, to think out loud in ways that feel socially engaged and intellectually active, but that frequently produce confident expression of poorly evaluated conclusions. The person who speaks first and most in a meeting is not the person who thought fastest. They are frequently the person who thought least, whose internal quality control process is least demanding, and whose verbal output is therefore least delayed by the friction of rigorous self-examination. Let's now examine the social psychology of silence. Because intelligent people who stay silent are navigating not just a cognitive preference, but a complex social environment that punishes silence in ways that are both well documented and genuinely costly. And understanding this social dimension reveals another layer of the intelligence-silence connection that is rarely discussed. Research in organizational psychology on what is called the talker effect. The finding that group members who talk more are systematically perceived as more intelligent, more competent, and more worthy of leadership regardless of the actual quality of their contributions, reveals a genuine social tax on intelligent silence that the silent intelligent person is paying, often consciously and with full awareness of the irony. The person who says less but says it better is consistently rated as less impressive than the person who says more but says it worse by groups whose evaluation criteria are driven by the implicit association between verbal fluency and cognitive competence that social psychology has documented across cultures and contexts. This means that the intelligent person's decision to stay silent is not made in a social vacuum. It is made with some awareness, conscious or otherwise, of the social cost that silence carries, and the decision to pay that cost rather than perform the verbal participation that would avoid it is itself a form of integrity, a commitment to saying only what one genuinely means, to contributing only when one genuinely has something to contribute, to refusing the social performance of intelligence in favor of the actual thing, even when the actual thing is expressed most honestly through saying nothing at all. And now, let's arrive at the final and most important truth about why smart people stay silent. The truth that contains all the others and that reveals something, not just about intelligence, but about the relationship between depth, language, and the specific psychological maturity that allows a person to be comfortable with their own thoughts in the presence of other people's noise. The deepest reason that genuinely intelligent people choose silence is that they have developed, through experience, through reading, through the kind of sustained solitary reflection that intelligence tends to seek out and social stimulation tends to prevent, a rich, textured, self-sufficient inner world that does not require external validation to feel real, that does not need to be expressed to feel valuable, that does not diminish in the absence of an audience. They have learned through years of observing the gap between what they think and what social situations can accommodate, that the most important conversations are often the ones that happen internally, the conversations between the version of themselves that knows something and the version that is trying to understand it more deeply. And that protecting the space for those internal conversations sometimes requires guarding the external silence in which they occur against the claims of social performance and the pressure to fill every quiet moment with the kind of speech that costs nothing and means the same. So, if you are the person who stays quiet in rooms where others fill the air with confident noise, if you are the person who leaves conversations feeling that the most important thing you thought was the thing you never said, if you have spent any part of your life wondering whether your silence is a weakness rather than a form of discernment, this video is the answer. Your silence is not absence. It is presence of a different and more demanding kind. It is the behavioral expression of a mind that takes language seriously enough to use it only when it has something real to say, that takes other people seriously enough not to fill their ears with thought that has not yet earned the right to be spoken, and that takes itself seriously enough to know that the most valuable things it contains are often not the things that fit most easily into the conversations the world is currently having, but the things that are waiting patiently and completely for the conversation that is finally worthy of them. Subscribe for more Mind Secrets.